Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the latest episode of the Adopt 365 podcast. Today, we're going to talk about a feature, an application in Microsoft 365 that was originally announced about 18 months ago. I think when it was announced, we kind of were a little bit confused as to where it fitted in. It sounded like it was a mix between Teams, SharePoint, and some other components. But what I've slowly seen is it's become more and more integrated with multiple applications in Microsoft 365. Certainly, if you're using Copilot and testing out, you've probably noticed it there. And now it's a significant part of your meeting experience in Microsoft 365. So if you haven't guessed it already, of course, I'm talking about Microsoft Loop. But before we get started, let me introduce the co-host for today's podcast. First of all, Megan Warren.
Hello.
And Anthony Jarman.
Hi.
So as we normally do in this podcast, what we're going to do is start by going around the room. What is the one feature or functionality or something related to Microsoft 365 that has stood out to you this month? So Anthony, what is your one thing for the month?
So the nature of my job seems to be that I spend a lot of time kind of rotating around different areas of functionality in Microsoft 365 based on my clients' requirements. And at the start of COVID, I did a lot of work around Teams telephony. It was a very simple solution at that point. I've come back and been doing a lot more work with Teams telephony, and while I've been away, it's become a very sophisticated tool. And the area I just want to pick out for today as my one thing was the ability to have delegates. So a user on the solution can, through the Teams client, set a delegate, and that delegate can make calls on their behalf. They can receive calls on their behalf. They can make changes to the delegate settings, but also they can pick up held calls, which is a good way of just moving calls between a person and their delegate. But they can also join active calls as well, and that's becoming a really useful functionality, which enables people to join a call between themselves and whoever's looking after their calls, and for both those people to be active in the call. So yeah, I'm very, very impressed with the telephony, the Teams calling solution, and the level of sophistication we've got there now. Certainly, if anyone's looking at replacing their existing solution, then do talk to us, because we can tell you all about this functionality, which isn't obvious on the face of things, but makes a significant improvement to the way in which you work together in the organization.
Definitely. I really like to see how Teams Phone is maturing and how calling is becoming a lot more accessible and easy. Plus those features that really put people off initially are now embedded inside Microsoft Teams. So it's a good point to review what you're doing, what is the user experience, are you actually using all the features and functionality of maybe your legacy phone system? But also what I'm seeing is it's an opportunity to remove the complexity. Let's remove the amount of moving pieces in this requirement. Let's just add it as an extension to that modern workspace experience that you've already got. So fantastic example there, Anthony. Thank you. Megan, what's your one thing for the month?
Well, mine is something I've been exploring, but not yet using or testing because it's not in the environment at the moment. So I've been looking at Viva Engage campaigns. So typically with Viva Engage, we have the communities where you build those communities and people engage. We then had storylines where you can share what you're doing and people can follow you. You get a bit of that sort of Instagram story feel with it. And now Microsoft are introducing campaigns within Viva Engage. So you're able to start a new campaign. It has a hashtag associated with it that people can follow, leaders can endorse, etc. And then when the campaigns become end of life or anything like that, you can then stop it. So it's a lot more fluid than communities that are a lot more sort of what's the word I'm looking for? They're there for the whole thing. They're not just
static.
Yeah, that's thank you. So an example I was thinking of is if you had like a charity thing that you're doing as an organization, like run 5K every day in May, you could do that and people can come join that campaign. They can add their things saying, I just ran 5K or whatever that is. And then when May's over, you stop that and it allows you to start the next campaign, or you could do it for marketing as well. So really interesting to see how that engagement is increasing in Viva Engage and the new features that they're bringing. As I say, it is currently rolling out, so I haven't got access to it at the moment, but the research that I've done and sort of the videos that I've watched have been really promising. I think it's going to add a whole new level to Viva Engage as well.
I think one of the biggest challenges we've got in this kind of hybrid way of working is that kind of culture, buying people together, making people feel part of something. And I think it can be very difficult to do that through technology, but any additional little thing we can do to help, I think, is really important. I think the important thing to bear in mind, which most people forget, is this is just a platform. So if you were doing something back in the day of being in the office, you might book a meeting room to go and do a bit of a staff appreciation lunch or something like that. You wouldn't expect the meeting room to improve the culture of your business. It's what you do in that meeting room that makes the difference. And that's exactly the same when it comes to Viva Engage for me kind of thing. And the multitude of different ways that you can leverage it, the different features that you have in your room. So whether you've got a pool table in there and that's what brought people into the room previously, it's exactly the same with Viva Engage. It's what works for your business. How are you going to get people to buy into something? So if there's an opportunity to bring people together with a common goal through that campaign feature, I think that sounds absolutely fantastic. So from my perspective, it's been all around Copilot. I've spent a lot of time in the day job utilizing Copilot in the role that I do for the business as CTO. But actually I used Copilot for something, thinking outside the box a little bit. I had a rare day off with my daughter. She's 8 and had a teacher training day. And actually I told Copilot what we were doing, what we were planning. And I really wanted to come up with a fun activity that we could do throughout the day to keep her kind of interested as we were doing various different things. So I love photography, and I really wanted to help get my daughter into photography and enjoy that. So what Copilot actually did for me is it planned a day of photography exercises, both for me and my daughter, where we both had to try and achieve something throughout the day. So there were examples. We went and played crazy golf, and she had to find an animal in the scenery of the crazy golf environment to take a picture of herself, take a picture out the train window, take a picture of her food whilst it was looking like a smiley face. So it was a real fun way to kind of bring the activity together in the day. But I just wanted to use this to highlight when you're using Copilot or considering Copilot to think outside the box. I'm not suggesting you use it to plan your social activities, but certainly if you've got a set of ingredients in the fridge, tell Copilot what they are, and it might be able to suggest what you could do for dinner. That might help take your stress out of the day. So yeah, think out of the box with Copilot.
I'm loving the way you're using Copilot as a ready, steady cook tool. I'd hate to think what it comes up with in my fridge.
Yeah, my fridge is a little bit empty. We're waiting for the food shop to turn up at the moment. So yeah, so definitely that we'll have to do it across the company. Is it red pepper, green pepper, kitchen, and see what we can come up with the £5 bag. But yeah, no, it's been good using Copilot, and I'm finding more and more use cases. So let's dig into the main subject of today's podcast. Let's talk about Microsoft Loop. As I said at the beginning of the podcast, it was announced about 18 months ago. It's probably been around for just short of that in public preview, and then become generally available more recently, I believe. I think Anthony and I are going to be here asking Megan lots of questions, because Megan is definitely the person that is more of a pro at this than us. So Megan, let's start with you. Maybe you can describe what Loop is and what each of the components are. I was going to say and where it fits and what you can do with it, but I think that's going to take a bit more diving into. So first of all, describe what Loop is, how Microsoft speak about it, and what the different components are.
Okay, yeah, sure. So Loop is being described by Microsoft as their latest co-creation application, which to me feels a little bit fluffy, maybe doesn't do it justice because it doesn't really describe what it is. But Loop is that shared space, and we'll go dig into the different parts of it in a minute, but that shared space for you and your team to come together to create lists, create text, create any sort of shared information that you want. And I want to highlight that real sharing piece, because I think we'll come on to the difference between Loop and OneNote in a minute. But yeah, that sharing piece. And it's broken down into 3 key elements. So you have a workspace. So within your workspace, so for this example, we have our Adopt 365 workspace for the podcast. Within that workspace, which everyone has access to here, we then have pages. So for each month of the podcast, we're creating pages within that, and you can create sub pages just like you could with OneNote, etc. And then on those pages, you then have components, and they are made up of all different types of information. So you can add in text as a component, you can add in a table, you can add in a bullet point list, you can add in a task list, whatever that comes to. But the best bit about it is because you have separate components within that page, it then allows you to pick and choose what you share with people. As an example, whilst myself, Anthony, and Barry all have access to the Adopt 365 workspace, I may choose that this one piece of text, maybe it's the blurb for this podcast, I want to share with our account management team. I don't want to share the whole page where it's got the bullet point of what we're going to talk about. I don't want to share the whole workspace where it's got every monthly page. I just want to share that piece of text. I can pick and choose at that point which component I share with them, whether that was the task list, whether that was just that bit of blurb there. So yeah, you have components that live on pages, that pages live in a workspace. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of describing it. And I think the challenge is when you talk about it, it sounds like a couple at least of bits of technology that we might already have at some levels. So Microsoft Teams and OneNote are my two examples that I think co-creation, that was the whole kind of point of Microsoft Teams, that you've got these different areas to collaborate on, but maybe more collaborative rather than that co-creation piece. We've also then got OneNote that is for that note taking, and there definitely is an overlap there with Loop, because you could choose to utilize Loop potentially in that way. So what do you see, Megan, as to how the how Loop would be used differently to Microsoft Teams or OneNote, or maybe how it would be used in conjunction with those?
So in terms of how Loop will be used with Microsoft Teams, there's a lot of integration between Loop components, those single sort of piece elements of Loop, and Microsoft Teams within meetings, within chat, within channels, etc. So there's already that integration. So I don't know that there's too much overlap. The difference is, if I were to start a Loop component, maybe a bullet point list in a chat with the account management team as an example, that then wouldn't live in the right workspace or the right page. I would then have to copy it and paste it into there. It would live in its own component in Loop there. So there needs to be a bit of structure and some controls put together around how people are going to start Loop components, where to do it, etc. But already very well integrated with that. In terms of OneNote, I really do see them as separate applications. I think when it was first announced, everyone was like, this is it, this is the end of OneNote, it's gone, no one's going to need OneNote anymore. But I really don't see that happening. I really see OneNote as your own individual notes that you take. So if you are somebody that likes to take your own notes, whether it's in a meeting, whether it's whatever that is, OneNote is now almost like the place you do that for your own notes. But if you wanted to take something that other people are going to access and share and collaborate and co-create on, Loop is then the place to do that. And I think the nice bit about Loop is you don't have to have a whole workspace or page, etc. You can just create that component with somebody to co-create. So I really see the difference as OneNote is now becoming that standalone application that you use for yourself. Loop is becoming that for your team sort of task or co-creation. Also, I would say the syncing capability and how quick Loop is at syncing is way beyond where OneNote is. I know OneNote has that capability and it will sync and you will see what other people are typing, but I always feel like there's a little bit of a lag. There is no lag with Loop. Any change that somebody's making on a Loop page or component instantly shows as they're typing a letter, it shows in my Loop interface as well. So yeah, OneNote probably for your own individual notes moving forward, Loop for those team-based notes.
I think the first time I ever saw co-authoring of documents in the Teams environment in Microsoft 365, you seeing the potential of getting lots of people into one document and creating that together. I think what I find with Loop is that's taken it and made it a far more powerful thing, because it's taking individual components of a document and you're not having to manage the whole document. So those individual components, and you can share those out with other people as well. So I could say, look, here's my list of things that I think we want to talk about at this meeting. I'm going to share that with the attendees of that meeting, but it still remains under my control, and I can see them working on it, and I can integrate that into the minutes for the meeting and say, look, here we go, that's what it is. And there's so much more potential for it now. It's been componentized rather than just being co-authoring in one document for one particular client.
So I think it's really useful in these kind of situations to talk around a use case and how it can be utilized. So recently at Cascade, we decided to create a sales playbook, a kind of a Bible, a central place to look at everything to do with sales at Cascade. So whether you're a new salesman coming in or whether you're wanting to look at a process or a particular technology that we've got and how to go and talk to customers about that. So I'm sure Megan will correct me if I'm wrong, but we used a Loop workspace to create that playbook with the relevant people having access to it once we had created it. But initially we just started with the people that were collaborating on the main playbook. So it was the sales director and Megan and I that initially were looking at that. We used the pages inside of Loop to create the different categories that you could dive into. And what was really useful is you could create sub pages that sat underneath them. So to create the real structure of how that document looks and feels from that perspective. One thing that I found that I really liked is actually you can create a sub page as a link somewhere else. So some of those sub pages went into a Loop page, other ones went out to a SharePoint intranet page that already exists, or an internet page, maybe to a partner's website or something like that. But one of the examples was in one area of that playbook, we wanted to link to maybe example projects that customers run when it comes with modern workspace or Azure hybrid cloud. And what we're able to do is create a Loop component and share that with the pre-sales architects to help us create the detail in there, make sure terminology was correct, or maybe suggest workshops that we could do with customers around those different technologies. And what was really nice is the pre-sales architects were able to see that in a chat that had been shared. They were just able to edit that on the fly directly in the chat. They didn't have to open up Loop, open up Word or anything like that. They were able to do that directly in the chat where it had been shared. But every time they were updating it and tweaking it and changing it, it was dynamically changing at exactly the same time inside that Loop page, inside that Loop workbook. And that was really nice. And then when we publish this to the rest of the team, we'll come to some of the idiosyncrasies around security and sharing, I think, a little bit later. But there were a number of things that we had to tweak and change. But what was really nice is when we shared that, it was just automatically updating irrespective of where it was, so we could do it on the fly. Then since then, there's been kind of a few comments like, how do I do this? Or where do I find that? And rather than always just pointing people back to that Loop workbook, you can take each component from the page inside the workbook and share that directly in the chat. So if someone's going, oh, have you got the contact details for this person? Or what is the process to do X, Y, and Z? If it exists in the playbook, we can just take that section, put it in the chat, and then if it changes ever, we can edit it directly in the workbook, and everywhere it's been shared will be able to be dynamically updated. So I think this was a real kind of, what's the word, a real organic use of Microsoft Loop. It was pivoting around the use of the workbook. And I think some use cases, it isn't always about the workbook, it's about the page or it's about the component. It doesn't always have to start with what is the workbook that it sit in, what page does it sit in, and what are the components. Sometimes it's just about creating a component that could be shared in an email, in a chat, and other locations.
I think one of the things that with the new Outlook, you can now, rather than just doing it in chat, which is I think what you use, you could share a component with in chat, you can do it actually in an email now. So and you see that email being updated live in front of you. So yeah, it's really good technology.
Yeah, there's so many places that you can use Loop now and in different ways as well. But no, I think that's a really good use case of how we are using it internally, Barry, and we'll come on to recommendations for starting, but I do think the organic way is the best. Just remember, everyone, it's a workspace, not a workbook. I think Barry was getting playbook and workspace mixed up a little bit, but it's quite a lot to get your head around when you don't know it like inside out to understand the workspace pages, components and stuff like that. So I'll forgive you for now, Barry, but when we recap this in a month's time or something, I expect you to know it's a workspace.
Need to make sure I pass the test. So Megan, why don't you give some examples of other ways that it can be utilized? Maybe start with Teams meetings, because I see that as a way that it's been integrated quite tightly and you might not even realize that you're using Loop.
Yeah, so when you create a Teams meeting within Teams at the moment, this isn't working when you create a Teams meeting via Outlook, but when you create a Teams meeting via Teams at the moment, at the bottom, it will come up saying agenda. So you used to have to create your agenda in like the notes bit or the description bit there, and it was static still. Now, when you create a Teams meeting in Teams, you get a bit at the bottom that says agenda. When you click on that, that is a loop page or component. I'm not 100% sure, and now I feel like I should have known that. Now I picked on you there, Barry, but I will double check that. But it creates that for you as part of the meeting, so you can add in people who are joining the meeting, you can add in the agenda items, and then from that it will then come up with the actions as well. So before that meeting, anyone that's invited to that meeting can go and add their agenda points. So if you say to everybody, here's the meeting, can you go and add your agenda points? Everyone can go and add to the agenda. Maybe if there's something that you've missed, they can go and add it in there as well. And then what's nice is when you're then in that meeting, you open up the notes section. So when you're in the meeting and you click notes at the top, that has the agenda, it has the people that are there, and then it also has actions or tasks at the bottom, which you can go and add to it. So like Barry said, it's already integrated into Teams, and it's a really easy way for you to start getting used to that co-creation piece and using that loop component there. But yeah, really easy to use, and recommend that everyone starts doing it, especially around those tasks and actions, etc.
And then I think even in meetings, then I've seen when I've been taking my notes, the notes are now then stored in Loop as well when you're actually in that meeting. And I think in the most recent one that I did, even the activities that I put into there were then created in Loop, and I think also integrated with Planner. I think I saw in one of the meetings I was in the other day, but this is definitely the direction that it's heading in.
I was going to say, I
Yeah.
know when you set your follow-up tasks in at the bottom of the agenda, you've got the option there to say, do you want that to sync into your tasks application? So yeah, we're seeing all of that integration coming in to make things a lot easier and a lot more efficient for people.
Yeah, and you don't even have to, with the task piece, you don't have to do it in a meeting. So if you create a loop page or whatever, if you put / and then add tasks, that will add like a little table of tasks. You can type in the task, who it's assigned to, and then if it goes into do or into a planner, what is nice is if you click to do, it will go into the individual people's to-do list, so they're able to keep on top of it. But if it is related to a bit of a project that you're working on that you want to see it sort of in one view rather than just in everyone's individual to-do list, you can put it into a planner. Now, you can't put it into an existing planner. It will create a brand new planner. So if you do need it to be in an existing planner, you would have to do that manually. But we can see the start of that progress, the fact that it will go and create a planner for you that everyone in that loop page has access to already, and then you can keep a track of it. Or, of course, it can go in your individual to do as well.
And I'm guessing if Copilot's created tasks for you, that they'll be integrated or can be integrated into the same area as well.
Coming, I think, because Copilot tasks don't quite add to your to-do or planner at the moment, but I can't see it being that far off. If Loop is already doing it, I can only see Loop and Copilot becoming best friends anyway, in the way that they work, and they're already integrating already.
I think one of the challenges with Copilot is if it was to do it automatically by putting it in your planner, it's got to ensure that who it does it to is correct and what the item is. So I'm envisaging that you get to the end of the meeting, you ask it what the actions are, and then you're able to click a button to turn them into tasks. I think that would be the logical way to make sure that it is accurate and correct rather than it being completely automated. You come back a month later and it's misinterpreted something, and yeah, that could be quite dangerous if some of the actions were annotated wrong in some of the meetings, and yeah, you end up shutting a business down rather than shifting a business or something like that, because the action was incorrect from Copilot.
Barry's just terrified that we're going to go and add loads of tasks to his to-do list, Anthony, and take it all off our plate. Sounds wonderful.
It does, yeah.
Another area that I've seen in Megan is whiteboard. Do you want to talk to us about how it's utilised in whiteboard? And I suppose that's where Copilot does come in as well.
Yeah, so I think whiteboard has been the overlooked application for collaboration and for teamwork in the past few years. But now what we're able to do with Loop is we're able to come in and add in things like Loop components, again, using Loop within that whiteboard. to allow you to co-create in other ways. So whiteboard is already great for those creativity meetings that you want, or co-creation creativity sort of place, but Loop being able to integrate with that as well. You can also get Copilot in there. I don't want this to become a Copilot podcast, but you can then go into Whiteboard and use Copilot to help you create some ideas for a marketing campaign or anything like that as well. So yeah, Loop is in Whiteboard at the moment, and it does add those different components to it.
And one of the areas that I've been quite impressed with, just to bring Copilot into everything, because I do at the moment, but if you are using Microsoft Loop and you are using either the web app, or you can create a modern application, so in the browser you say download the app, it's exactly the same version, but it gives you an icon that can sit on your task menu. But when you're in there, you can use Copilot, and that is one way that I have used it. So I am using it for my personal note taking. I don't know if that's right. As we said, maybe I should be using OneNote, but personally I've never got on that well with OneNote. It hasn't been something that I've gelled with, and Loop is something that seems to be working for me. I do wish you could automatically arrange pages alphabetically in Loop, as I do with OneNote. I think that is a significant limitation of OneNote, and a little bit annoyed to see that that basic functionality hasn't come through to Loop as yet. But when you're taking my notes in there, there's been times that I've gone, oh, someone's mentioned this, what is this thing? Or can I get a definition of what that means? So you click the Copilot button and say, annotate what is X, Y, and Z, and it will then create a paragraph that explains what it is for you. So I found that really beneficial to help with your note taking when you are utilizing it. Megan, Anthony, did you want to highlight any other use cases? We've got a number of here, but I think we've mentioned most of them, using it in conjunction with Teams, with meetings, Copilots in Loop, emails, whiteboards. Should we move on to sharing now, or has anyone got anything else they would like to cover for use cases?
There's only that case that we've looked at, and I don't know how far we got with this, but using it as boilerplate text in proposals, so you can always keep your standard text in a proposal up to date in a central place, and wherever that component appears in a proposal, then you know it's always, every time it's printed, is up to date. But I don't know, did we explore that any further at all?
Yeah, so at the moment, if I created boilerplate text about who Cascade is in Loop, I could share that component in an email. I could share it via Teams channels, Teams chat, etc. At the moment, you can't share it in something like a PowerPoint presentation or a Word document. I do think that is an incredibly useful feature of it, and I would hope something that is in the future with Loop, that it integrates into the 365 applications like Word, etc. Because then at that point, especially for me in marketing, I can make sure that everything that's been said about who Cascade is as standard meets the right sort of tone of voice guidelines, make sure it's all spelt correctly, whatever that is. And then the sales team can then just copy it, put it into any document. And then if I change it for any particular reason, maybe we're there for 25 years rather than 20 years, and I just want to update it across all the documents, I can go and do that. And then the sales team don't have to worry. Not there at the moment, but a very good use case in the future that, as I say, would hopefully come. The only other thing I did want to talk about, I know we were talking about tasks a minute ago, what you can do, and I forgot to mention this when I was speaking about Planner, what you can do is in a Loop page, you can add a component of an existing planner. So you could then go and add to it directly in that Loop component. That doesn't take away from the fact that you would want Planner in your team or that everyone has access to it, but you can go and do that. So if you had a Loop page for like meeting notes, maybe you got a all-day board meeting or something like that, you can add the planner directly into that Loop page, and you can add to it directly from there, almost getting rid of the fact that you need that task list in there unless you wanted to go into to-do.
Makes sense. So Megan, talk us through the sharing options with regard to Loop at the various different levels.
Yeah, so at the moment, sharing is only enabled via or allows you to share internally. So at the moment, I can't share a Loop page, a workspace, or a component with anybody than my colleagues in Cascade. You're not allowed to do it externally at the moment. So there is that limitation. But the fact that within Loop you are able to share, depending on what content you want to share, is something that we've never seen before within Microsoft 365. So I could choose, if I've created a workspace for a new campaign I'm launching or something like that, I could share that whole workspace with people in my organization. However, whilst the sales team may need to access the whole workspace because it talks about target market, it talks about the technology, it talks about, I don't know, an elevator pitch, whatever that is, and each page is on there, I could share that whole workspace with the sales team. However, I may say to the customer excellence team that the only piece that they need to know is this one page, and actually someone else in the organization may only need to know this one bit on a component. I can pick and choose who I share what with, whether that is the whole workspace, whether that is the whole page, whether that is just one component or multiple components. You have such granularity as to who you share that with. It's really useful. As always, you have to pick who you share it with. So you can either say everyone in Cascade or everyone in your organization, people with existing access, or people I choose. If you do put in somebody else's external email address under people I choose, it will say we can't find an exact match and you can't share that. I imagine future sharing capability will be external, but then of course you then have to understand who you're sharing with, what you're sharing, what information let's get added to the workspace or the page after you've shared it, etc. But yeah, at the moment, really, really useful for that internal sharing, the fact that you can share by granularity.
One of the areas that I found that isn't quite ready for production use cases in all scenarios is with those sharing capabilities. Unlike the rest of Microsoft 365, you don't have granular permissions on what you can do when sharing it. At the moment, when you are sharing a Loop workspace or a component, etc., you are sharing it in such a way that the person you share it with can edit it and tweak it and do what they want with it. The one feature that I would like to see ASAP is the ability to share something with a read-only capability. And this was something towards the end of getting to our sales playbook that I kind of went, oh, I didn't feel quite comfortable with it, but I trust the sales team. We know that it is an area that we're working together, but in many scenarios, for example, if you wanted to use it for policies or anything like that, you wouldn't want people to be able to edit it. So that is an area that I've heard that Microsoft are working on, but it isn't currently got a GA, and I've not seen anything on the roadmap specifically around that. But I do think it is significantly missing at the moment, the ability to be able to control what someone that you give access to can do with that piece.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, there was an area that you want to talk about, Megan, around searching functionality. Is that something that you want to discuss now? Maybe also talk about how you can use the Loop application, I suppose, to also find the loops that you will be working on.
Yeah, so in terms of Loop, it is one of the best applications that I've seen around the searching functionality. The fact that when you search for something, it will look into the text that is within a component or on the page, etc. So it won't just look for the titles that is on like a workspace or a page. It will actually look at the content and search for that. Also, when you share components, pages, workspaces, whatever, or if you create a component within a Teams chat, you can then go and find them in the Loop application, and whether that's in the browser or on the actual desktop application. Anthony and I were chatting before recording this, and they are much of a muchness. You don't get any different functionality whether you use the browser or the desktop application, and they are both so easy. I have fallen into the trap of, not a trap, but fallen into the habit of using the web browser, because when I started using Loop, I didn't know that the desktop application was available yet. So I'm used to using the web browser, but I would recommend just using the desktop application because it is really, really useful. But what is nice as well is when you share those components or pages or workspaces, when you go on office.com or the Office application, they're listed there, like the recent documents you've been working on in PowerPoint or Word or Excel. Your Loop components are also listed there. So if you've been working on recently can't remember what it's called, can't remember where you've shared it, etc., you can just go on office.com and find it there in that list. Makes it so much easier. And of course, you can then search in office.com or the Office application and find those components as well there. Or you can jump into Loop and they'll all be listed as recent as well. So Loop is almost like integrating everywhere. It makes it so much easier for you to find anything just by the fact that it is being seen as not the applications like Word, but the fact that you can find it like those makes it a lot easier for you to navigate through that.
I think one thing to say there is think about what you're calling things. When you create a page or a sub page, then the first thing you have to do is, or the best thing to do is actually give it a sensible name. And then it's a lot easier to go back through Office and find it. I remember using, creating a document to share in as a Loop component when it first came out, probably 6 months ago. And I was trying to find it the other day and I just couldn't find it, and I just called it Loop. So I eventually managed to get it. I probably could have done with a lesson on searching from Megan to help me find that. But just think about the names you call things so that they slot in, because you can have a page and then you can have any number of sub pages in there, and they all seem to I generally tend to call them the same things. So, but yeah, just put a bit of thought into that when you give the name to something.
That's definitely the same of when you're sharing components via like Teams chat or channels, because we've had it before where people have shared like a bullet point list, and maybe it's like a quick to-do list or something like that, and people have shared that and they've just called it to-do list. Now by the time you've shared 6 or 7 of those called to-do list, and then you're searching to-do list, you're going to have to go through all of those, and it's not going to make it easier for you. So the more information you give it, the more detailed you are about it, one, it's going to make it easier for you to search, but also when you do search for it, it will stand out a lot easier rather than having to filter through the sort of wrong ones until you find the right one.
So I think before we kind of conclude with Megan's recommendations on how to get started with Microsoft Loop, if you haven't done it before, I think we've already highlighted a couple of limitations there in terms of doesn't currently integrate with the traditional Microsoft Office applications, Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. It also, we highlighted the limitations of sharing, that there's no kind of different levels of access you can give people. You're either giving someone access, full access, or not. The other limitation that I've seen is no integration with SharePoint Online at present, and for me this is a logical place for it to be available. It would be really nice to be able to add a Loop component to a SharePoint page, because certainly some of the things that we've spoken about around kind of company descriptions or product descriptions or something like that would be really nice if you could create that in Loop, or create it on SharePoint even, and you create it on SharePoint as a Loop component, but then that Loop component also sits in a workbook, also sits in a proposal, also sits in a set of notes kind of thing. So currently no integration with SharePoint Online. The workaround for that I would recommend is linking to a component or a page or a workbook from SharePoint. So you can still kind of do that. I have read some people have been able to embed a page mainly from like a web link into SharePoint, but it's very much a hack, a workaround, rather than a officially supported solution. So I do see that as a bit of a limitation at the moment. Oddly, there's nothing on the roadmap at the moment with integration with SharePoint, Word, Excel, or PowerPoint. That isn't particularly unusual. Microsoft like to save things like that for a big announcement, and then they will all of a sudden appear there. So I wouldn't worry that that means it's too far away, but we don't know. This is just us speculating, I suppose, at that moment. So Megan, we've spoken a lot about Loop. Hopefully people get a good idea for what that looks and feels like. I believe recently you did some training on the Adopt 365 platform. So as a reminder, anybody that buys Microsoft 365 licensing from us, or anyone that buys the Adopt 365 platform for us, will have access to a platform with lots and lots of training material about Microsoft 365, step-by-step guides, videos, but equally monthly live training happens on there as well. So if you're lucky enough to have access to the Adopt 365 platform, Megan recorded, I think it was some live training about a month or maybe 2 ago on that platform. If you haven't got access and would like access to Adopt 365, talk to a Cascade account manager or connect with me on LinkedIn, and we'll see if we can do you an amazing deal on your Microsoft 365 licensing, and you get Adopt 365 included at no additional charge. But Megan, for those that are now considering going and playing with Loop, looking at Loop, what would be your recommendations for how they should look at it, how they should get started today?
Yeah, so the easiest thing is probably looking at it within Teams. So understanding how or what different components you have access to within Teams, chat, channels, and obviously we spoke about meetings as well, but that's quite standard as to what you get access to there. Obviously you can add your own Loop components to a meeting chat, but I'd probably start off with channels or a chat there and just have a look at the different components. If you are looking at how to use Loop seriously, I would probably say set up a workspace, but make sure that it has a purpose. Don't just set up a workspace for anything. Make sure you have a workspace that you're going to need for the future, whether that's for a project team, whether that's for your departmental team, whatever that is. Set up that workspace so then you have that space to go to add in your pages and add in your components within those pages. So I would also say keep it quite small to begin with. Don't start a workspace and then share it with everyone in the organization, because that's not the intention of Loop. It is for those focused areas for your team, for a campaign, for a project, whatever that is, to have that shared co-creation space. But I would recommend going and setting up that workspace, couple of pages, and then seeing how that evolves, and then it will naturally or organically go from there, because that is just how Loop works. Once you get used to it, which does take a little bit of time to just understand and get your head around that piece, but once you have your head around it and get used to it, it just works, and it's like the go-to application at the moment.
Mm.
I think an important part on that, and I completely agree with what Megan's there, is think about the limitations that we've said today. So think of the nature of what it is that you're creating, who you're going to need to share it to, and what is the sensitivity of the data within your sharing it. It's part of Microsoft 365, it's part of the Graph API, so I wouldn't be concerned by putting sensitive data in it by the nature of it, but it's thinking about who then has access, and are you happy that everyone that will have access will have full edit control of what is in there. That is really where you're using Loop for get lots of people trying to edit this. As I said, I hope the read-only access comes in the future, because then I think that allows you to have an authoritative Loop workspace where some people are the authority and some people are the consumer, and I think that is a next phase that I think will be really nice. Another example that has constantly been asked about is kind of like a wiki, and we saw a very poor implementation of a wiki in Microsoft Teams back in the day. This feels like a step closer to having something that is more wiki-like, that could be used as a really collaborative knowledge base, but maybe still does lack some of the ability to be able to index or categorize stuff automatically, even if it's just alphabetically.
I didn't know people still use wikis. That is a blast from the past for me. What I was just going to say, adding on to what you said there, Barry, that everyone has the editing capability. Everyone also has the sharing capability. So if you share it with me, for example, I can then choose to share it with anybody else internally as well. So it's not just the fact that they can edit the content that's on there, they can choose to share it with everyone else in the organization as well. So just something to be aware of, adding on to what you've just said there.
Makes sense, thank you. And I'll let you know about Wikipedia later. It's one of the most popular websites on the internet, so possibly you haven't heard of that one yet. So thank you ever so much, everybody that has listened to this podcast. Thank you ever so much to Megan and Anthony for joining me today. It's been really interesting to dive into Microsoft Loop. I think it has a strong future, and I think what we're seeing at the moment is touching on just the very basics of what it's capable of. So I hope that you delve into Microsoft Loop, go and have a look at that, go and have a look at the content on the Adopt 365 platform if you haven't got that already. Don't forget, if you utilize Microsoft 365 and would like a free audit to understand how you can make the most out of Microsoft 365 in your environment, just reach out to us here at Cascade. We're happy to offer that free audit to you. But thank you ever so much for listening. We look forward to speaking to you on the next podcast next month.